Concorde was retired in 2003 after 27 years of operation. It's remembered for its long service with both British Airways and Air France. But did you know that it was much more popular at its outset? In fact, 18 airlines placed options for Concorde. As we now know, all except 2 airlines cancelled them. Concorde and the development and future of supersonic flight could have turned out very differently had more of these orders been realised. Let's take a look at the airlines that placed and cancelled options and why they did this. Plans for supersonic commercial aircraft picked up in the late 1950s and early 1960s. In the United States, Boeing was working on the 2707, while Lockheed was working on the L2000. Russia had developed and built the Tupolev Tu-144, which first flew just before Concorde. Concorde was Europe's contribution to supersonic passenger flight. It was developed as part of an international treaty between the British and French governments. The name Concorde was in fact chosen to represent this cooperation, with the English Concorde and French Concorde meaning agreement. Each of the 2 governments spent the equivalent of $1.44 billion developing the aircraft, vastly more than original estimates. Although the governments never saw any profit on the program, operating airlines did. Concorde was built by British firm British Aircraft Corporation, later to become BAE Systems, and French firm Sud Aviation, later Aerospatiale. Despite being funded by the 2 governments, the intention was to sell to airlines worldwide. Concorde took its first flight on March 2, 1969 and entered service in January 1976. Despite plenty of interest from other airlines, aircraft were only ever delivered to British Airways and Air France. Each airline took 7 aircraft, and a further 6 aircraft were developed as prototypes and testing models. There was no shortage of interest in Concorde, and in all, around 100 options for later purchases were placed by 18 airlines. Only British Airways, Air France, and interestingly Iran Air converted these to committed orders. There were originally 2 versions of the aircraft, a long-range and a short-range version. There was little interest, however, in the short-range aircraft, and this was ultimately dropped. All orders and options placed were for the long-range version. According to website Heritage Concorde, here are all the airlines who had options or orders for the supersonic jet. BOAC would place 6 options in 1963 and 1 more after it became British Airways in 1984. Air France would order 6 in 1963 and 1 more in 1980. Pan American World Airways would place 6 options in 1963 plus 2 more in 1966. Continental had options for 3 in 1963. American Airlines and Trans World Airlines, or TWA, each placed 4 options in 1963 and 2 more in 1964. Middle East Airlines placed options for 2 in 1963 with 2 more in 1964. Qantas placed options for 4 in 1964. 2 for Air India in 1964. 3 for Japan Airlines in 1965, and 2 for Belgian carrier Sabena in 1965. Between 1966 and 1967, Eastern Airlines would place options for 6. United Airlines also went for 6 aircraft in 1966. Braniff placed options for 3 in 1966, while Lufthansa had options for 3 in 1967. Air Canada had options for 4 in 1967. The CAAC, or Civil Aviation Administration of China, had options for 3 in 1972. And finally, Iran Air had officially placed orders for 2 Concorde jets in 1972. This included an option for 1 more. As you can see, Concorde was never designed to be operated by just a British and a French airline, even though it was a joint program between those 2 countries. However, all other orders and options were cancelled though, most by 1975, with a few airlines hanging on until 1979 and 1980. With only 14 aircraft delivered, the program would never be able to recover the massive cost of development. To break even, the consortium required 150 orders. Had more of these orders stuck, perhaps the Concorde program and the future of supersonic flight would have proceeded differently. Why then was Concorde and the dream of supersonic flight not to be for these airlines? Although reasons differed from one airline to another, let's go over some of the overarching issues plaguing the aircraft program. Firstly, the increasing cost of development led to increases in the cost to airlines. Coupled with this were uncertainties over both the cost of operation and what premium passengers would be prepared to pay. Supersonic flight was new, and increasing costs did not help confidence in its operating possibilities. In a 1973 report of Pan Am cancelling its orders, the New York Times explained this fear well. The price has soared from the under $20 million per plane originally estimated until, with spare parts, it's $46 million in 1972 dollars. Many insiders estimate escalation clauses will bring the price to $60 million. The US alternative to the Concorde, the Boeing 2707, was cancelled in 1971. This was for a variety of reasons, including rising costs, design difficulties, and environmental pressure. The aircraft actually had more options placed than Concorde, at least 122 options from 26 airlines, including several that also placed options for Concorde. Such a high-profile cancellation did nothing to boost confidence in supersonic travel or the Concorde program. But unlike the American-made Boeing 2707, the Soviet Tupolev Tu-144 was actually built and entered service. The aircraft had its flaws, including a short-range high fuel consumption and limited passenger comfort. While Concorde improved on all of these, it was still indirectly affected when a Tu-144 crashed in 1973 while demonstrating at the Paris Air Show. Like the cancellation of the Boeing 2707, this was a significant setback for supersonic travel at a critical time. The noise and environmental pollution associated with the sonic boom and operation caused many problems for Concorde, just as they were a significant factor in the cancellation of the Boeing 2707. Early in the program, airlines had been denied landing slots at New York, JFK, and there was an increasing concern that territories would ban overland flying. The prospect of exclusively over-water supersonic flights was not a limitation many airlines could handle. Things changed quickly in aviation, and in the 1970s there was a shift in operating models. Many airlines saw the potential of larger high-capacity aircraft to reduce costs and ticket prices. Thus, the appeal of premium, high-cost travel diminished. Aircraft such as the Boeing 747, first flying in 1969, provided a new direction for airlines. Many, including Qantas and several US airlines, embraced the 747 and changed their fleets significantly. Now let's look at some of the more notable Concorde orders mentioned in the list above. One of the most interesting Concorde orders was from Iran Air. It was the closest to becoming a third operator of Concorde, having placed a confirmed order for 2 aircraft and 1 further option. These orders were placed in October 1972 amidst close ties between Iran and France. Several other deals between the countries were placed at the time, and pilots would travel to France for Concorde training. In 1978, the same year that the first aircraft was due to be delivered, Iran had a change of power. Relationships with the West changed, and the order was viewed as a sign of opulence from the previous Shah. The orders were cancelled in 1980, with the oil crisis at this time being the final straw. The aircraft moved over to British Airways. While never appearing in Iran Air livery, Concorde did actually fly to the country. Taking place before the order cancellation, this was done as a wet lease deal with Air France for flights between Paris and Tehran and Kish Island. Qantas, at one point, had strong ambitions for supersonic flights. It placed options for both Concorde, 4 aircraft, and the Boeing 2707, 6 aircraft. The 2707 project, of course, was cancelled, and in 1973, Qantas finally dropped its Concorde options. As well as the general problems with supersonic flight faced by all airlines, Qantas had more specific issues. It planned to operate Concorde from Sydney to London via Singapore, but with only 4 aircraft, the frequency would be much lower than other services. Would passengers pay a high premium just for faster service when it was less frequent and less luxurious than other options? There was also a concern whether Concorde could even operate non-stop to Singapore, being right at the edge of its 4,000-mile range. It switched instead to the newly developed Boeing 747, opting to follow the model of high capacity and lower fares through scale. This served it well as it operated the 747 right up to 2020. In fact, in the 1970s, it was the world's only all-747 airline. Instead of the premium option of Concorde, it offered a top first-class product, including a Captain Cook-themed lounge on the 747 upper deck. There were 3 original launch customers for Concorde: BOAC, the forerunner of British Airways, Air France, and Pan Am. These three airlines all placed options for 6 aircraft each in June 1963. There was a keen interest in supersonic flight in the US. All the leading US airlines at the time placed options for Concorde. This is despite US manufacturer Boeing having its separate 2707 SST program. This apparently caused some concern for US President Kennedy, who said the following of the Pan Am order. This order involves hundreds of millions of dollars in balance of payments, which is going to sabotage a program to put the United States up in the lead in the 70s. Pan Am placed options for 6 aircraft in 1963 and went on to place 2 more options in 1966. However, it cancelled all its options in January 1973. Its main problem was with the economics of operating Concorde. The increasing cost of the aircraft, coupled with rising oil prices, left it uncomfortable about the fares that it would have to charge. The cancellation from one of the launch customers and a major US airline was not good news for the program. Manufacturers knew this and had tried hard to persuade Pan Am to stick with Concorde. In the months following Pan Am's order cancellation, all other US-based airlines cancelled their own options. This included Continental, American Airlines, TWA, and Braniff. By then, United Airlines and Air Canada had already cancelled. Braniff International Airways was a large US operator, flying domestically as well as within the Americas, and after 1970 it also flew to Europe and Asia. It ceased operations in 1982 amidst rising oil prices and growing competition after deregulation in the US. The airline placed options for 3 Concordes in 1966, but, along with all other US airlines, cancelled these in 1973. It did, however, go on to operate Concorde domestically in the US, the only airline ever to do so. This was done in a more indirect fashion. In 1979, the airline was expanding and wanted to return to this prestigious idea to operate Concorde. The solution was an interchange agreement with British Airways and Air France. Braniff operated Concorde domestically between Dallas-Fort Worth and Washington-Dulles airports. This portion of the flight was to remain subsonic. British Airways or Air France crews would operate the supersonic transatlantic sector. An impressive undertaking, Braniff crews were trained on Concorde, but British Airways still had a cockpit crew on board as observers for insurance purposes. US law also required the aircraft's registration numbers to be changed for domestic flights. The cooperation, however, only lasted around 1 year. Another interesting option came from China via the Civil Aviation Administration of China, or CAAC. It placed 2 options in July 1972 and 1 more in August. It held out longer than most other airlines and did not cancel its last option until February 1980. This would have been an interesting move had it gone forward. Chinese aviation at the time was very limited, and the country was looking to introduce more long-haul and international routes. Concorde would have served premium routes while also acting as a VIP transport for Chinese leaders. Officials were apparently impressed with the design and aerodynamics. According to Asia Times, political and economic troubles finished off Concorde ambitions. The CAAC was unable to make down payments to convert options to orders and cancelled options in late 1979 and early 1980. With the Concorde program costing so much and so many airlines cancelling options for aircraft, the future was bleak for further supersonic developments. Concorde, of course, remained in service until 2003 and was, for some time, profitable to operate. Did you know about all of the airlines that have placed options for the Concorde? Let us know your thoughts and reactions in the comments. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the Simple Flying channel and be sure to click the notification bell.